I knew something was wrong the moment I saw my name on the place card. Not because it was misspelled, not because it was missing, but because it was placed on a small round table by the emergency exit tucked between a coat rack and a fire extinguisher far from the long tables draped in ivory linen and crystal centerpieces. The wedding planner smiled too brightly when she handed me the card. "Just temporary," she said, already turning away. "We'll adjust once everyone arrives." I had heard that lie before. The ballroom at the Charleston Harbor Club glowed with old Southern wealth. Tall windows framed the water outside where the sun dipped low and turned everything gold. Chandeliers hummed softly overhead, their light bouncing off polished wood floors and rows of white roses. Every seat at the main tables was filled with laughter, perfume, and the rustle of silk dresses. Except mine. I was the older sister, yet I sat alone. My name is Claire Holloway. I was 32 years old that night, and I had spent most of my life being quietly removed from the picture. The string quartet began to play. Guests leaned in toward each other, smiling, sipping champagne. Somewhere across the room, my mother laughed, her voice sharp and proud the way it always was when she stood beside my younger sister, Brooke. Brooke the bride. She stood near the altar in custom lace, her hair swept into a perfect low bun. She looked radiant. She always did. My mother had spent years making sure of that. I watched as my parents took their seats in the front row. My father adjusted his tie. My mother smoothed her skirt, scanning the room as if checking inventory. When her eyes briefly met mine, her smile faltered for half a second. Then she looked away. That half second told me everything. I folded my hands in my lap and breathed slowly, reminding myself why I had come. Not for approval, not for reconciliation. I had promised my grandmother before she passed that I would always show up with dignity, even when others did not deserve it. "She'll come around," my grandmother used to say. "People always show who they are eventually." At the time, I did not realize she meant all of them. A waiter approached with a tray of champagne flutes. He paused when he saw me sitting alone. "Are you with the bride's family?" he asked carefully. I smiled, unfortunately. He hesitated, then handed me a glass. "Dinner will be served shortly." Dinner. The word tightened something in my chest. At every family event growing up, dinner had been a reminder of where I stood. Brooke at the center, me at the edge. Thanksgiving meant Brooke carving the turkey beside my father while I set plates near the kitchen. Christmas meant Brooke opening gifts one by one while I waited, pretending not to notice the smaller pile with my name on it. Birthdays were the worst. Brooke's were full weekends. Mine were quiet dinners, if remembered at all. I had learned early that love in our house was something you earned by being admired. And Brooke was always admired. The officiant cleared his throat. The room hushed. Brooke took her fiancé's arm. Applause filled the space, warm and thunderous. I clapped too, softly, politely. From my seat, I could see my mother leaning toward a woman I did not recognize, whispering something with a proud tilt of her chin. The woman nodded, impressed. "She raised such a perfect daughter," my mother would be saying. She always did. The ceremony blurred together. Vows, tears, laughter, promises spoken into microphones while cameras flashed. I watched Brooke's face as she smiled up at her groom, and for a moment a memory surfaced uninvited. Brooke at 16 crying because she did not get the lead in the school play. My mother on the phone the next day insisting something be done. A week later, the cast list changed. Me at 17 accepted into a summer business program in New York. My father shrugging. "Sounds expensive." I swallowed the memory with a sip of champagne. The ceremony ended. Applause erupted again. Guests stood, chairs scraped, music swelled. No one came to get me. Tables filled. People found their seats. The main family table laughed loudly as servers poured wine. I remained by the exit, watching as if through glass. Finally, my mother approached. She did not sit. She did not hug me. She held a small plate in her hand. Half a piece of salmon, cold vegetables, a smear of sauce. "They overcounted," she said flatly, setting the plate down in front of me. "Eat this. Don't make a scene." I stared at the plate. "Brooke's big day isn't about you," she added, lowering her voice. "Try not to embarrass us." Then she turned and walked away. I did not cry. I had learned long ago that tears only proved her right. I pushed the plate aside and looked around the room. Conversations flowed. Glasses clinked. Laughter rose and fell. Somewhere a man joked about stock markets. A woman bragged about her daughter's promotion. Promotion. The word echoed. Because what no one at that wedding knew was this: 3 weeks earlier, I had been named interim chief financial officer of Whitmore and Kane Holdings, a private investment firm that quietly managed more assets than anyone in that room could imagine. I had not told my family, not because I was ashamed, but because I was tired of watching my achievements become inconvenient truths. I had learned to keep my successes private, safer that way, quieter, less ammunition. I picked up my phone more out of habit than intention. That was when I heard it. Claire. The voice came from behind me, female, polished, uncertain. I turned. A woman in a navy gown stood a few feet away, her eyes wide, her posture stiff with disbelief. Diamond earrings caught the light as she took a step closer. "Oh my God," she said softly. "What are you doing sitting here?" I blinked. I could ask you the same thing. She laughed once, sharp and nervous. "No, I mean, why aren't you up there?" "Up there!" I felt the first ripple of something shift in the air. She glanced past me at the main table, then back again, confusion turning to concern. "Claire Holloway," she said carefully. "From Whitmore and Kane." I said nothing. Her hand flew to her mouth. "You're the one they just announced last month," she whispered. "The youngest executive they've ever appointed." The room seemed to tilt. She started, then stopped herself, glancing around as nearby guests began to notice the tension. "They don't know, do they?" I followed her gaze. My mother was laughing. Brooke was raising her glass. The perfect picture. "No," I said quietly, "they don't." The woman straightened, her expression hardening with something like respect. "Well," she said, voice steady now, "they're about to." Behind us, music faltered for just a second. And for the first time that night, I felt it. The tables were beginning to turn. The woman in the navy gown did not lower her voice the way my mother always did when she wanted to control a narrative. She raised it. Not enough to shout, just enough to carry. "Claire Holloway," she said again, clearly this time, "from Whitmore and Kane Holdings." A few heads turned. I felt it immediately, that subtle shift in the room, the way conversations thin out before they stop. Curiosity always arrives before judgment. It slides in quietly, pretending it's harmless. I stood slowly smoothing the front of my dress, my pulse steady in a way that surprised even me. Years of swallowing humiliation had trained my body for moments like this. When chaos comes, I do not flinch. I observe. The woman extended her hand. "Marianne Feldman," she said, "board advisor. We met briefly in New York last winter." Of course we had. I remembered her clearly. She had been sharp skeptical and deeply unimpressed by people who spoke too much and said nothing. She had watched me the entire meeting, silent, measuring. "You were impressive," she added, not bothering to hide the weight of the word. Behind her, a man leaned toward his wife and whispered something I could not hear. Another guest glanced openly at me, then back toward the main table. Marianne followed my gaze. "Oh," she said softly, "they really don't know." "No," I said, "they never ask." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "That's unfortunate. For them." She turned toward the ballroom, her posture straightening, her voice rising just enough again. "I didn't realize the bride was related to you," she said. "Small world." That did it. My mother froze mid-laugh. I saw it from across the room the exact moment her instincts kicked in. She turned slowly, scanning faces, until her eyes landed on me standing beside Marianne. Her smile faltered, reset, tightened. She excused herself from the table and crossed the floor with purpose, heels clicking sharply against the wood. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone light but her eyes sharp. Marianne looked at her, then at me, then back again. "We were just talking about Claire's appointment," she said pleasantly. "Congratulations, by the way. You must be very proud." Silence. My mother blinked, once, twice. "Appointment," she repeated. Marianne tilted her head. "Interim Chief Financial Officer, Whitmore and Kane. It was announced publicly last month." My mother laughed, too quickly. "Oh," she said, waving her hand, "there must be some confusion. Claire exaggerates sometimes." There it was. The familiar dismissal served on a silver platter. Marianne's expression did not change. "I don't believe Whitmore and Kane exaggerates," she replied calmly. "Their filings are quite precise." A few guests nearby pretended not to listen. No one moved away. My mother's jaw tightened. "Well," she said, forcing a smile, "family dynamics can be complicated." Marianne nodded. "Yes, they can." I could feel Brooke watching from the head table. I did not look at her yet. My mother leaned closer to me, lowering her voice. "This is not the time," she hissed. "We can talk later." "We've never talked later," I said quietly. Her eyes flashed. "Don't do this." "I didn't," I replied. "You did." Marianne cleared her throat. "I should say hello to the groom," she said. But Claire, it was lovely seeing you again. She squeezed my hand briefly before walking away, leaving behind a silence that buzzed like static. My mother stared at me as if I had just broken something valuable. "What have you done?" she whispered. "I showed up," I said. "Like you taught me." Her face hardened. "You always do this. You always try to take attention away from Brooke." Across the room, Brooke stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. She handed her glass to her husband and walked toward us, her smile already fixed in place. "Is everything okay?" she asked sweetly. My mother answered before I could. "Your sister is causing confusion." Brooke laughed lightly. "Claire," she said, touching my arm as if we were close. "You know this day isn't about you." I looked at her hand on my sleeve. "Neither was my childhood," I said. Her smile froze. A murmur rippled through the nearby guests. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Another woman glanced between us, eyes wide. Brooke's voice sharpened. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said evenly, "that you've never noticed where I was seated, or what I was given to eat, or why." My mother stepped forward. "Enough." "No," I said, "I've had enough." The words surprised them. They surprised me too. I turned slightly, addressing no one and everyone at once. "I was asked earlier why I was sitting by the exit," I said. I didn't have an answer then. My mother's face drained of color. "I think I do now." Brooke's eyes flicked around the room. "You're embarrassing yourself," she said tightly. I smiled, not because it was funny, because it was freeing. I was told my entire life that I was forgettable. I continued, that I should be grateful for scraps, that I should stay quiet so someone else could shine. My mother reached for my arm. I stepped away. I believed that I said for a long time. The room was completely silent now, but I stopped believing it. Brooke's husband had turned toward us. So had several people at the head table. My father remained seated, his gaze fixed on the tablecloth. "Claire," my mother said through clenched teeth. "Stop." "I can't," I replied, "not anymore." Brooke scoffed. "You always play the victim." I looked at her fully then. Really looked. "You were never the villain in my story," I said. "You were the beneficiary." Her face flushed. "That's not fair." "No," I agreed, "it never was." A man near the bar cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said. "Did you say Whitmore and Kane?" I turned toward him. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "I'm Thomas Avery. We've been trying to get a meeting for months." Marianne had reappeared behind him, her expression unreadable. "Well," she said lightly, "now seems like a good time." A nervous laugh rippled through the crowd. My mother looked as if the floor had shifted beneath her feet. "This is inappropriate," she said loudly. "This is a family matter." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "With respect," he said, "public appointments are public matters." Brooke's voice trembled. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked me. I considered the question carefully. "Because every time I did, I said you reminded me where I belonged." My father finally looked up. Our eyes met. For the first time in my life, he looked ashamed. The band resumed playing uncertainly. Plates clinked. Someone laughed too loudly. The party was trying to continue. But something had cracked. And as I stood there, no longer by the exit, but in the center of the room, I realized this was only the beginning. Because the truth once spoken does not retreat. It waits. And then it demands more. The speeches were supposed to start after dinner. That was the plan, printed neatly on the ivory programs tucked into each place setting. Toasts, laughter, carefully rehearsed gratitude. But the room no longer followed plans. Waiters hovered uncertainly. Trays half-lowered, eyes darting between tables. Conversations resumed in fragments, but nothing flowed the way it had before. Every laugh sounded forced. Every smile strained. I returned to my seat by the exit, not because I was told to, but because I wanted to watch. From there I could see everything. My mother sat rigid at the family table, her posture immaculate, her lips pressed into a line so thin it nearly disappeared. Brooke leaned toward her husband, whispering sharply, her eyes flicking toward me every few seconds, as if I might stand again at any moment. My father stared into his wineglass. He had always done that when things grew uncomfortable. Silence had been his refuge, his shield, his excuse. A waiter approached me again, this time with a full plate. "Compliments of the kitchen," he said softly, avoiding eye contact. I thanked him, though I knew it was not the kitchen's idea. It was damage control. I did not touch the food. Instead, I let my thoughts drift backward to the moment that had started all of this long before tonight. My grandmother's house smelled like lemon polish and old books. I had been sitting at her small oak table, the one with the nicked corner, when she folded her hands over mine and said, "Promise me something, Claire." She was thin by then, fragile. Her eyes, however, were still sharp. "Promise me you won't let them disappear you." I I had laughed lightly because it sounded dramatic. No one's disappearing me. She squeezed my fingers. They already are. I did not understand what she meant until after the funeral. That was when the will was read. Or rather, when it was summarized. My mother had sat across from me in her living room, sunlight streaming through the windows, dust motes floating like they were part of something peaceful. She left everything to your father, my mother said, brisk and efficient. It's simpler that way. I remember nodding, trusting. Why wouldn't I? My grandmother had adored me. She had taught me how to balance a checkbook, how to read contracts, how to ask questions without apologizing. She used to say I had a mind for numbers and a spine for storms. I never imagined she would leave me nothing. Later that night, alone in my apartment, something gnawed at me. A quiet unease. I pulled up public records, probate filings, and there it was. A copy of her will, divided equally between her granddaughters, Brooke and me. My share had never reached me. I confronted my father first. He looked at the document, his face draining slowly, and said nothing. Then I went to my mother. She didn't deny it. That money would have been wasted on you, she said calmly. Brooke needed it more. Needed. The word echoed in my head now as I watched her laugh stiffly at something a guest said. I had not fought them then. I had been 24, exhausted, grieving, and still hoping that compliance would one day earn me love. Instead, I walked away. I built my life quietly, deliberately, without their help. And now, years later, the past had followed me into a ballroom by the water. Claire. I looked up. My father stood in front of me, hands clasped awkwardly in front of him. Can we talk? He asked. I gestured to the empty chair across from me. He sat, his shoulders sagging, as if the weight of the evening had finally pressed down on him. I didn't know how to stop her, he said after a moment. You never tried, I replied. He flinched. That's not fair. No, I said. It's accurate. He rubbed his temples. Your mother, she's always been strong-willed. She's been controlling, I corrected. There's a difference. He sighed. Brooke depended on her. And I didn't. His mouth opened then closed. I thought you were tougher, he said quietly. The words hit harder than anything my mother had ever said. Toughness isn't permission to be neglected, I said. He nodded slowly, tears pooling in his eyes. I see that now. I did not tell him that seeing it now did not undo the damage. Across the room, the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone. If we could have everyone's attention, he said, voice slightly strained. We'd like to begin the toasts. Brooke stiffened. My mother straightened. The first toast was harmless. A college friend, a joke, polite applause. Then my mother stood. She took the microphone with practiced ease, smiling brightly as she turned toward the crowd. My daughter has always been extraordinary, she began. From the moment she was born, we knew she was special. I watched Brooke's chin lift, pride radiating from her. And tonight, my mother continued. She stands as proof that dedication and support can create something beautiful. Support. I stood. The sound of my chair scraping against the floor cut through her words like a blade. My mother faltered. I apologize, I said, my voice carrying without effort. May I add something? Gasps rippled through the room. My mother's smile trembled. Now is not. I'll be brief, I said. The master of ceremonies hesitated, then handed me the microphone. I did not look at Brooke. I did not look at my mother. I looked at the guests. I was raised in the same house, I said, by the same parents. A murmur stirred. But I learned early that support was selective, I continued. That some children are celebrated and others are managed. My mother shook her head silently, pleading. I don't blame my sister for that, I said. Favoritism poisons everyone it touches. Brooke's face flushed. But I do blame the lie, I added. The lie that says worth is decided by who is easiest to love. Silence. My grandmother believed in fairness, I said. In truth. In accountability. My mother's eyes widened, and she left behind a will that reflected that. The room inhaled as one. I won't discuss details tonight, I said calmly, but I will say this. I paused, letting the weight settle. Inheritances are not just money, I said. They are legacies, and the ones built on theft always come due. I handed the microphone back. Applause broke out slowly, hesitant at first, then stronger. My mother stood frozen, her face pale. Brooke stared at me, something like fear flickering behind her anger. My father covered his face with his hands. And I sat back down, my heart pounding, knowing that the truth had finally crossed a line it could not retreat from. Because the moment you name the theft, you invite the reckoning. And reckoning once invited always arrives. The applause faded, but the tension stayed. It clung to the room like humidity, heavy and unavoidable. People shifted in their seats, pretending to return to their meals, though most plates remained untouched. Forks hovered, glasses were lifted and set down again. I felt it then, the quiet certainty settling into my bones. There would be no going back after tonight. My mother avoided my eyes entirely. She busied herself straightening napkins that did not need straightening, whispering urgently to Brooke, who sat stiffly beside her husband. Brooke's smile was gone now, replaced by something brittle and sharp like glass under pressure. I stayed where I was. For years I had trained myself to disappear when discomfort entered a room. To excuse myself, to apologize for taking up space. Tonight I did none of that. Instead, I let my mind drift somewhere safer, somewhere colder. Christmas. Every year without fail, the invitations came late for me. A quick text, a rushed call, always after Brooke's plans had been finalized. Just wanted to check if you're coming, my mother would say, as if I were an afterthought she had just remembered. Brooke's hosting this year, so space is a little tight. Space was never tight. Their house had 5 bedrooms, a formal dining room, a den no one used. But somehow there was never room for me. One Christmas I arrived to find my childhood bedroom converted into a yoga studio for Brooke. A mat lay where my bed once stood. "Oh," my mother said lightly, "you can sleep on the couch." Another year my chair at the dinner table was missing entirely. "We assumed you wouldn't mind," my father said quietly, avoiding my eyes. "You're always so flexible." Flexible. That was the word they used when they meant disposable. Back in the ballroom, a woman approached me hesitantly, mid-50s, pearls at her neck, curiosity softening her features. "I hope this isn't intrusive," she said. "I'm Brooke's aunt by marriage." I nodded, "Of course." She glanced toward my mother, then back at me. "I always wondered," she said gently. "You were never in the Christmas photos." I smiled small and tight. I was usually the one taking them. Her expression darkened. "That's not right." "No," I agreed, "it isn't." She squeezed my hand once, then moved away, shaking her head. Small moments like that followed. Quiet acknowledgments, side glances, murmurs of understanding. Each one loosened something in my chest I had carried for decades. The speeches ended abruptly after that. No dancing followed. The band packed up, early confusion etched across their faces. Guests began to leave. Some avoided me, others sought me out. "You handled that with grace," one woman said softly. "My daughter went through something similar," another whispered. "Thank you for saying what so many of us couldn't." Grace. I had never been described that way by my family. My father approached again as the room thinned out. His shoulders looked heavier now, his posture older. "Your mother is furious," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. "She says you humiliated Brooke." I looked at him. Did I lie? He hesitated. "No." Then the humiliation wasn't mine to own. He nodded slowly. "She wants to talk tomorrow." I shook my head. "I don't." His brow furrowed. "Claire, she's still your mother." "And I was still her daughter," I said. "All those years." He looked down ashamed. Outside, the evening air had turned cool. The water reflected city lights, shimmering and indifferent to human drama. I stood alone for a moment, breathing deeply, letting the night ground me. That was when my phone buzzed. A message, unknown number. "You might want to check your email. Probate records don't disappear. Some of us have been curious for years." My heart skipped. I opened my inbox. There it was. A forwarded email chain time-stamped years ago. My grandmother's attorney, my mother, my father. Clear language. Explicit instructions, equal distribution. And a reply from my mother. Handled. Nothing else. No explanation, no documentation, just that single word. I stared at the screen, my hands steady, my mind oddly calm. This was not revenge. This was confirmation. I forwarded the email to my personal attorney without hesitation. Then I blocked my mother's number. Inside the ballroom, Brooke stormed past me, her eyes red, her voice shaking. "You've ruined everything," she spat. I met her gaze evenly. I didn't ruin it. I revealed it. She laughed hysterical. "You've always been jealous." I shook my head. "I've always been invisible. There's a difference." She turned away, shoulders shaking. My father lingered near the door. "What happens now?" he asked. I looked out at the water, the lights, the quiet certainty of the night. Now I said, "The truth finishes what it started." I walked away without looking back. For the first time, Christmas would not include an empty chair waiting for me. Because I was done showing up to tables where I was never meant to sit. And the season of silence finally was over. The first thing I learned after that night was how quickly silence turns into noise once the truth has a direction. By the time I woke the next morning, my phone was already vibrating on the nightstand. Emails, missed calls, voicemails left without messages, the digital equivalent of someone knocking on a door they once pretended did not exist. I ignored them all. Instead, I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and opened my laptop. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, soft and ordinary, completely disconnected from the earthquake that had begun the night before. That contrast grounded me. Life always goes on, even when families fall apart. My attorney called at 9 on the dot. Claire, she said, her voice calm but alert. I've reviewed the documents you sent last night. And I asked, and they're clean, she replied. Very clean. Your grandmother's will is explicit. Equal distribution. No contingencies. No discretion granted to your parents. I closed my eyes briefly. So it was stolen, I said. Yes, she answered, plain and simple. There was no hesitation in her voice, no softening of language. Lawyers do not waste words when the law is clear. What are our options, I asked. She paused, then said, recovery, litigation, and if the funds were intentionally concealed or misrepresented, potential criminal exposure. Criminal. I exhaled slowly. I had imagined many versions of accountability over the years. Confrontations, apologies, public embarrassment. I had not imagined this. Before we proceed, she continued, I need to ask you something. Go ahead. Do you want justice, she said, or do you want reconciliation? I smiled sadly. Those are mutually exclusive, I said. Yes, she replied. They usually are. I ended the call with clear next steps and a strange sense of calm. Once something has a process, it loses its power to haunt you. Uncertainty is what hurts. Clarity heals. By noon, my mother's number had cycled through, blocked to voicemail 3 times. The messages grew progressively less controlled. First outrage, then denial, then tears. You've misunderstood everything, one message said. You're tearing this family apart, another accused. By the 5th message, her voice cracked. I did everything for you. I deleted them all without listening to the end. At 3 in the afternoon, my father called. I answered. I just left your mother, he said quietly. She's not well. I leaned back in my chair. Is she sorry? Silence. That answers my question, I said. She's scared, he admitted. She didn't think you'd ever fight back. I didn't fight back, I replied. I walked forward. He sighed heavily. What are you going to do? I looked around my apartment. The bookshelves I had filled myself. The furniture I bought secondhand and refinished. The life I built without them. I'm going to let the law do what it exists to do, I said. And us, he asked. I closed my eyes. There is no us, I said gently. Not the way you want. That night I slept better than I had in years. Not because the situation was resolved, but because I was no longer pretending it wasn't real. The following week unfolded like a controlled burn. My attorney filed the initial claims. Requests for accounting, notices of intent. Paperwork moving quietly but relentlessly through systems designed for exactly this kind of betrayal. And then came the calls from extended family, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Aunts who had once smiled politely while repeating my mother's version of me. Uncles who had praised Brooke's accomplishments without ever asking about mine. I had no idea, they said. I always wondered, others admitted. One voice stood out, my grandmother's sister, Eleanor. I tried to stop her, Eleanor said over the phone, her voice shaking with age and anger. Your grandmother suspected something was wrong near the end. She asked for records. Your mother told her everything was handled. I closed my eyes, pain and vindication colliding. She trusted her, Eleanor continued. We all did. I don't anymore, I said. That makes you smarter than most of us, she replied. 2 days later, the story reached places my mother could not control. Quiet places, legal ones. Banks requested explanations, account histories were examined, transfers questioned. The money trail did not lie. And then inevitably it reached Brooke. She showed up at my apartment unannounced on a rainy Thursday evening. I opened the door and found her standing there, mascara-streaked hair pulled into a careless knot. She looked smaller somehow, less polished, less certain. Can I come in? She asked. I stepped aside. She stood in the middle of my living room looking around as if she had never really seen my life before. You could have told me, she said. I tried, I replied. She shook her head. No, I mean, about the money, about how bad it was. I laughed softly. You lived in the benefits of it. That doesn't mean I knew, she snapped. I looked at her carefully. Did you ever ask? She opened her mouth, then closed it. I didn't think it was my responsibility, she said. There it is, I replied. She folded her arms defensively. You always act like you're morally superior. No, I said. I act like consequences exist. Tears welled in her eyes. Mom is panicking. Dad can't sleep. Everything is falling apart. I held her gaze. It fell apart when the theft happened. You're just feeling the noise now. She took a step closer. If you go through with this, you destroy all of us. I did not raise my voice. I am not destroying anything, I said. I am refusing to carry what was never mine to bear. She stared at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time. You really won't stop, she whispered. No, I said, I won't. She left without another word. When the door closed behind her, I leaned against it and exhaled deeply. The law had begun its work. And for the first time, I understood something my grandmother had tried to teach me long ago. Justice is not loud. It is patient. And once it starts moving, it does not ask for permission to finish. I did not expect the confrontation to follow me into my work life. I should have known better. The first sign came on a Monday morning, when my assistant knocked on my office door with an expression that told me something was off before she ever spoke. There's a woman in reception asking for you, she said carefully. She says it's urgent, family. I didn't have to ask who. My mother had never once shown interest in my career. She never asked where I worked, what I did, or how I paid my bills. In her mind, I had always been surviving on the edges of someone else's success. Until now. Tell her I'm unavailable, I said. My assistant hesitated. She's refusing to leave. Of course she was. I stood, smoothed my blazer, and felt that familiar tightening in my chest. Not fear. Anticipation. This was new territory for her, my world, my rules. When I stepped into the glass-walled reception area, heads turned. Conversations stalled. My mother stood near the desk, her posture rigid, her handbag clutched like armor. She looked out of place, not because she wasn't well dressed, she always was, but because this space did not bend around her. It did not defer. It did not know her. This is ridiculous, she snapped at the receptionist. I am her mother. The receptionist looked relieved when she saw me. Miss Holloway. My mother turned. For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across her face. Then she recovered. There you are, she said sharply. We need to talk, now. I glanced around the open office. People watched discreetly, pretending not to listen while absorbing every word. Not here, I said calmly. She scoffed. Of course not. You never want witnesses. I met her eyes. You raised me to value appearances. This is me honoring that lesson. Her mouth tightened. I led her into a small conference room and closed the door behind us. The glass walls remained transparent. Nothing hidden. Nothing whispered. She rounded on me immediately. How dare you bring lawyers into this? She hissed. Do you have any idea what you're doing? Yes, I replied, I do. She paced. You are humiliating us. You're dragging the family name through the mud. The family name survived theft just fine, I said. It can survive accountability. She stopped pacing. You always twist things. No, I corrected. I clarify them. Her eyes flashed. You think because you have some fancy title now you're untouchable. I smiled slightly. No, I think because the law is on my side, I don't have to be afraid. That stopped her. She leaned forward, palms pressed against the table. I protected you, she said, lowering her voice. You don't see it, but I did. By stealing from me, I asked. By managing you, she snapped. You were never like Brooke. You needed guidance, limits. I felt something inside me settle, click into place. This, I said quietly, is the first honest thing you've ever said to me. She blinked. What? You didn't believe in me, I continued. You believed in control, and when I didn't fit the version you could control, you minimized me. Her jaw clenched. I did what was necessary. No, I said, you did what was convenient. She straightened, pulling herself up to full height. If you proceed with this, she said coldly, don't expect to be part of this family ever again. I laughed softly. You already decided that years ago, I said. You just never said it out loud. She stared at me, searching for something. Guilt, doubt, weakness. She found none. You've changed, she said finally. Yes, I replied, I grew. She turned toward the door. This isn't over. I held it open for her. No, I said, it's just begun. She left without another word. When the door closed, the office exhaled. Conversations resumed. My assistant appeared, eyes wide. Are you okay? She asked. I am, I said, and I meant it. Later that afternoon, I sat alone in my office, the city stretching out beneath the windows. I thought about the years I had spent making myself smaller in rooms like that conference room, softer, easier. I thought about how often women are taught that silence is strength, when in truth it is often just survival. My phone buzzed, a message from my attorney. We've uncovered additional transfers, larger than expected. This may involve more than civil liability. I closed my eyes. The scope was widening. So was the truth. That evening, as I packed up to leave, a junior analyst lingered by my door. Can I ask you something? She said nervously. Of course. How did you learn to stand your ground like that? She asked. With family, I mean. I considered the question. I didn't learn it, I said finally. I earned it. By being ignored long enough to realize approval was never coming. She nodded slowly, absorbing that. After she left, I turned off the lights and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. I did not look angry. I looked resolved. And for the first time, I understood that revenge does not always come as fire and fury. Sometimes it comes as a woman who finally stops explaining herself and lets the truth do the talking. The Thanksgiving invitation never came. I noticed its absence the way you notice a missing tooth with your tongue, slowly at first, then obsessively. By the second week of November, it was unmistakable. No group text, no passive-aggressive voicemail, no last-minute "we assumed you were busy" excuse. Nothing. For the first time in my life, I wasn't excluded quietly. I was excluded deliberately. The realization should have hurt more than it did. Instead, it landed with a strange, hollow calm, as if some part of me had been waiting for this confirmation, the final proof that the bridge had been burned on their side long before I ever struck a match. I heard about Thanksgiving anyway. Eleanor called 3 days before. "They're hosting," she said, her voice low. "Your mother insisted. Big table, all the usual traditions." I smiled faintly. Of course she did. "She told people you were busy." "Career things," Eleanor added, then paused. No one believed her. That mattered more than I expected. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke early out of habit. Years of conditioning had trained my body to anticipate chaos, criticism, and quiet disappointment on holidays. My nervous system didn't know what to do with the silence. I made coffee, watched steam curl from the mug. Outside, the city was quiet, softened by cold air and fallen leaves. No drive to my parents' house, no assigned seat near the kitchen, no pretending not to notice who was praised and who was tolerated. Just me. At noon, my phone buzzed. A message from my attorney. "The bank has frozen 2 accounts pending investigation. Your mother has been notified." I closed my eyes and let the breath out slowly. Frozen. I imagined the moment. My mother's sharp intake of breath, her fingers tightening around her phone. The sudden loss of certainty that money once taken would always remain hers to control. Power hates interruption. At 2 in the afternoon, my father called. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. "Happy Thanksgiving," he said, his voice thin. "Is it?" I asked gently. Silence stretched between us. "They're all here," he said finally. "Everyone keeps asking where you are." "And what do you say?" "That you're working." I smiled without humor, still protecting her story. A long pause. "She's spiraling," he admitted. "The bank, the lawyers, Brooke barely speaking to her. She keeps saying you've poisoned everyone against her." "I didn't poison anything," I said. I removed the lid. He sighed. "Your mother wants you to come." I laughed softly. "To Thanksgiving?" "Yes." I pictured the table. The turkey carved by my father. Brooke at the center. My mother watching everyone's reactions like a general surveying troops. "What seat would I have?" I asked. He didn't answer. "That's what I thought," I said. "Claire," he said quietly, "she's your mother." "And I was her daughter," I replied. "For a long time." He swallowed. "She says she regrets how things were handled." "Does she regret what she did?" I asked, "or that she's losing control?" Silence again. I ended the call before he could answer. That afternoon I cooked for myself. Nothing elaborate, just enough. I set the table for one, not out of loneliness, but intention. As I ate, memories surfaced uninvited. The Thanksgiving when I was told to sit near the sink because Brooke needed room for her friends. The year my mother criticized the way I held my fork while praising Brooke's posture. The quiet humiliation of clearing plates while everyone else lingered with wine. I realized something then. They didn't just exclude me from the table. They trained me to believe I never belonged at one. That belief died that day. At 6 in the evening, my phone lit up again. A text from Brooke. "You really didn't come. Mom is furious. Dad won't stop pacing. This has gone too far." I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. "I didn't go too far. I finally went far enough." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "You always do this. You disappear and make everything worse," I typed slowly. "I didn't disappear. You just stopped looking." No response. Later that night, Eleanor sent me a photo. The Thanksgiving table, empty chairs, forced smiles. My mother, mid-sentence, her expression tight and brittle. Brooke staring down at her plate. An empty seat near the end of the table. "Your chair," Eleanor wrote. "No one would sit there." I stared at the image, something sharp catching in my throat. For years, my absence had been convenient. Now it was conspicuous. I slept deeply that night without dreams. The next morning brought another message from my attorney. "We've identified an offshore transfer. This significantly escalates the case." I sat up in bed. Offshore. That wasn't impulsive theft. That was planning. That was intent. This wasn't about favoritism anymore. This was about criminal deception. And as the scope of the betrayal widened, so did something else. My resolve. Because I understood now that what my mother feared most was not exposure. It was irrelevance. And the more she tried to pull me back into the family orbit, the clearer it became. I had already left. Not in anger, but in truth. Thanksgiving had come and gone without me. And for the first time, I wasn't the one left out. They were the ones sitting at a table filled with silence, finally forced to taste the absence they had spent a lifetime feeding me. The reckoning was no longer theoretical. It was scheduled. And it was coming. The promotion became public the same week my mother lost access to her accounts. I did not plan it that way. Life rarely coordinates its victories so neatly, but timing has a sense of irony that borders on cruelty, and this time it favored me. The announcement went out on a Tuesday morning. Whitmore and Kane Holdings internal memo. Effective immediately, Claire Holloway has been appointed permanent chief financial officer. Permanent. I stared at the word longer than I needed to. Interim had always felt like a borrowed coat. Respectable but temporary. Something that could be taken back if I made myself inconvenient. Permanent meant the decision had survived scrutiny, debate, resistance. It meant I had won the room without asking for permission. By 10 o'clock, my inbox was full. Congratulations. Well-deserved. Long overdue. A few messages from people who had once doubted me, now eager to align themselves with the outcome. I read them all. I answered none. Because somewhere between the wedding and Thanksgiving, I had learned a new rule. Validation that arrives late does not deserve urgency. At noon, my assistant knocked again, her expression unreadable. There's a reporter online too, she said. Financial desk. They're asking about the probate case. I nodded. Forward them to legal. She hesitated. And your family. I smiled faintly. They don't work here. That afternoon, I stood in front of the board for the formal confirmation. Faces lined the long table, some friendly, some cautious, all attentive. The chairman cleared his throat. Claire, he said, your performance during the last quarter was decisive. Not just financially, but culturally. Culturally. We've watched how you handle pressure, he continued. How you navigate conflict without spectacle. That matters. I thought of my mother in the conference room, glass walls reflecting her rage back at her. I nodded. Thank you. After the meeting, Marianne Feldman caught up with me in the hallway. You should enjoy this moment, she said. You earned it the hard way. I smiled. I don't know any other way. She studied me for a moment. Your family must be proud. I met her gaze. They're learning. That evening, as if summoned by the universe's sense of symmetry, my father called again. I answered. I heard, he said quietly, about the promotion. Yes. That's impressive. It was the closest he had ever come to praise. Thank you, I said. A pause. Your mother hasn't taken it well, he admitted. She says you're doing this to punish her. I closed my eyes. I didn't build my career to punish anyone. She thinks you're trying to replace her, he added almost defensively. I laughed softly. Replace her in what control? He didn't answer. She's telling people you were always ambitious, he said, that she knew you'd turn out like this. I shook my head. She knew I had potential. She just wanted to own it. Another silence. The offshore account, he said finally. Is that real? Yes, I replied. His voice broke. I didn't know about that. I believe you, I said, and I did. That didn't absolve him. But it explained him. 2 days later, the article ran. Not about the family drama, not directly. A profile. Rising CFO navigates market volatility with precision and restraint. There was a photograph I did not recognize. Me standing near a window, expression focused, unguarded. The caption described my leadership style as measured, unreactive, strategic. I read the article once, then closed it. That night, Brooke called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. What do you want? I asked, not unkindly. Her voice was raw, exhausted. Did you really get promoted? Yes. She laughed short and bitter. Of course you did. There it was. The truth she could no longer avoid. Mom says you planned all of this, she said, that you waited for the perfect moment to destroy her. I leaned against my kitchen counter. I waited for the moment I stopped being afraid. That's the same thing, she snapped. No, I said calmly. It isn't. She was quiet for a long time. Do you know what it's like, she said finally, to realize the ground you're standing on isn't solid? Yes, I replied. I grew up there. Her breath caught. They're talking about charges, she whispered. Real ones. I know. And you're just okay with that. I thought about my grandmother, the will, the word handled, the years of silence. I'm okay with the truth, I said, whatever it brings. She laughed again, hollow. You always sound so calm. That's because this isn't happening to me, I said. It's happening because of choices that were made. She didn't respond. I have to go, I added gently. I hope you find a way forward that doesn't require pretending. The line went dead. Later alone, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window. The city lights blinked steadily, indifferent to human drama, constant in a way families rarely are. I thought about how success changes things, not because it proves worth, but because it removes doubt. My mother had always believed I would fail without her guidance. My promotion was proof she had been wrong. And nothing unsettles a manipulator more than the loss of relevance. The legal process continued quietly in the background. Subpoenas, depositions, numbers traced back to their origins. Every day another layer peeled away. I did not gloat. I did not rush, because I was beginning to understand something deeper than revenge. The most powerful moment in a woman's life is not when her enemies fall. It's when their opinions stop mattering. And as I stood there, promotion secured truth in motion, family illusions crumbling without my participation, I felt it fully for the first time. I was no longer reacting. I was living forward. And the past, no matter how loudly it screamed, could no longer pull me back. The summons arrived on a gray Thursday morning, thick paper-heavy envelope, the kind that carries weight before it's even opened. I didn't flinch. By then I had learned the difference between fear and gravity. Fear makes you run. Gravity just reminds you where you stand. The hearing was scheduled for mid-December, just days before Christmas. Of course it was. Nothing exposes the truth of a family quite like the holidays. I dressed carefully that morning. Not to impress. To anchor myself. A simple navy suit. Low heels. No jewelry except my grandmother's watch, the one thing my mother hadn't managed to take. The courthouse smelled like old stone and cold air. Fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. People passed through security with the tired expressions of those who had learned that justice is rarely dramatic in real life. My attorney met me near the elevators. "They're here," she said quietly. "I assumed they would be," I replied. We entered the courtroom together. My mother sat rigid at the defense table, her hands clasped too tightly in her lap. Brooke was beside her, pale eyes darting. My father sat a row back alone. He looked smaller than I remembered. When my mother saw me, something flickered across her face. Not anger, not defiance. Fear. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The ritual grounded me. There was comfort in procedure, in rules that applied equally, no matter who you thought you were. The proceedings began with dry language. Account numbers, dates, transfer histories. The law stripping emotion from betrayal and laying bare only facts. My attorney spoke calmly, efficiently. No dramatics, no raised voice. She didn't need them. When the offshore account was mentioned, my mother's head snapped up. "That was for family protection," she blurted out. The judge raised an eyebrow. "You will wait to be recognized." My mother pressed her lips together, fury simmering beneath the surface. The bank representative testified next. Clear records, intentional obfuscation, repeated actions over several years. Pattern. That word echoed in my mind. When it was my turn to testify, I stood slowly aware of every movement. My grandmother's watch ticked softly against my wrist. "Do you swear to tell the truth?" the clerk asked. "I do." I took my seat and looked straight ahead. "Ms. Holloway," the judge said, "when did you first become aware of the alleged misappropriation?" I answered honestly, calmly, without accusation. As I spoke, memories rose and fell, not as pain, as context. When I finished, the judge nodded. "Thank you." Then it was my mother's turn. She stood stiffly, chin raised, posture defiant. I had seen that stance my entire life. It had always worked at home. It did not work here. Her attorney began with soft framing. Maternal intentions, family complexity, misunderstandings. The judge listened patiently, then asked one question. Why was the plaintiff not informed of these transfers? My mother opened her mouth, closed it. I believe she said finally that it was in her best interest. Silence. The judge leaned back. By what authority? My mother faltered. I was her parent. The judge's voice was calm. That is not a legal authority. Something broke then. Not loudly, not theatrically, but visibly. My mother's shoulders slumped. Her confidence leaked out of her like air from a punctured tire. Her attorney whispered urgently. She shook her head. I did what I thought was right, she said, her voice cracking. She never needed the money. The judge's gaze sharpened. Need is not the standard. The courtroom felt very small. When the ruling came, it was precise. Full restitution, additional penalties, referral for further investigation. My mother sat frozen, her face drained of color. Brooke covered her mouth, tears spilling silently. My father stared straight ahead, unmoving. I did not look at them. I focused on the sound of the gavel. It was not loud, but it echoed. Outside the courthouse, snow had begun to fall, soft flakes drifting down, indifferent to human collapse. My attorney smiled small and professional. "It's done." "Part of it," I said. Across the steps, my father approached hesitantly. "Claire," he said, "I'm sorry." I looked at him for a long moment. "I know," I said. It was not forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. Brooke lingered behind him, eyes red, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know it would go this far." I met her gaze. It went exactly as far as it needed to. My mother remained inside. She did not come out. That night, alone in my apartment, I decorated a small Christmas tree. Nothing extravagant. Just lights, a few ornaments. As I plugged it in, the room filled with soft glow. For years, Christmas had been about absence. This year, it was about clarity. The courtroom had done what family never would. It had listened. And for the first time in my life, silence had failed them instead of me. The rest of the reckoning was still coming. But the truth had been spoken, and it would not be unspoken. The house went on the market 3 days after the ruling. I found out the same way I learned most things about my family now, indirectly, quietly, without ceremony. A listing alert crossed my email from a real estate newsletter I had never subscribed to. The address stopped me cold. My childhood home, the white colonial with blue shutters, the one my mother used to call her legacy. Price reduced, motivated seller. I stared at the screen longer than I meant to. That house had been the stage for everything. Birthdays that weren't mine, holidays where I learned how to disappear gracefully, dinners where silence was praised and dissent punished. It felt strange to see it reduced to square footage and market value, but that I realized was exactly the point. The law does not care about nostalgia. It measures only ownership and consequence. My father called that evening. "They're selling the house," he said quietly, as if saying it too loudly might make it real. "I know," I replied. "She says she has no choice," he continued. "Between the restitution, the penalties, the legal fees." His voice trailed off. I pictured my mother pacing through empty rooms, touching walls she once believed made her untouchable. I imagined her anger, her disbelief, her insistence that this was all temporary. "She always said that house was yours," I said. "That it would go to Brooke one day." He sighed. "She never imagined losing it." "That's because she never imagined being wrong," I replied. Silence stretched between us. "Are you relieved?" he asked carefully. I considered the question. "No," I said finally. "I'm resolved." There was a difference. Relief implies release. Resolution implies permanence. The next week brought another shift. My mother was formally removed as trustee from the remaining family accounts. The court appointed an independent fiduciary, oversight, restrictions, boundaries she could no longer bend. She called me once. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail anyway. "You've taken everything," she said, her voice brittle, stripped of its usual authority. "I hope you're satisfied." I listened to the entire message before deleting it. Then I spoke out loud to no one in particular. "I didn't take anything. I stopped you from taking more." Work moved forward without pause. End-of-year projections, board strategy. A merger discussion that required more focus than emotion. I welcomed it. In meetings, I noticed something new. People listened differently now, not because I had changed, but because the noise around me had quieted. Without my family's voice in my head second-guessing every decision, my thoughts felt sharper, cleaner. One evening, Marianne invited me to dinner. "You look lighter," she observed as we sat down. "Not happier, just unburdened." "That's accurate," I said. She studied me over her glass. "You know," she said, "many people would have used this moment to destroy." "I'm not interested in destruction," I replied, "only alignment." "With what?" she asked. "With myself." At home later that night, I pulled out an old photo album, one my grandmother had given me years ago. Inside were pictures my mother had never displayed. Me at 10 grinning awkwardly, me at 16 holding an award no one had attended. I closed the album gently. I didn't need proof anymore. The house sold quickly. A young couple bought it, first-time buyers. I saw their photo online, standing on the front steps, smiling nervously. I hoped the walls would treat them better. My father moved into a small apartment nearby. Downsizing, he called it. I called it honesty. We met for coffee once, neutral ground. "She doesn't leave much anymore," he said quietly. "She says people are watching her." "They are," I replied. He nodded. "I should have stopped her." "Yes," I said, "you should have." He accepted that without argument. Before we parted, he reached across the table. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, "but I'd like something." I looked at his hand, the tremor in his fingers. "Consistency," I said. "Show up without asking me to make it easier." He nodded. I'll try. I believed him, cautiously. Brooke didn't call again. I heard through Eleanor that she had separated from her husband. The strain, the exposure, the reality settling in. Golden children are rarely taught how to stand without the pedestal. I did not reach out. Some lessons must be learned alone. As December deepened, the city filled with lights. Store windows glowed. People hurried with packages and expectations. For the first time, I did not dread the season, because I no longer measured my worth by who invited me to sit at their table. The house was gone. The money was returning. The truth was public. And my mother, stripped of the things she used to define herself, was finally facing the one thing she had avoided her entire life: accountability. That night, I stood by my window again, watching snow fall over streets that did not know my name. I felt no urge to call anyone, no need to explain. Revenge had never been my goal. Freedom had. And as the year came to a close, I understood something with quiet certainty. The woman who once controlled every room had lost her power, not because I fought her harder, but because I stopped needing her at all. One chapter remained, not of punishment, but of choosing what came next. The call came on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of quiet hour when the world feels paused. I was folding laundry, something ordinary and grounding, when my phone buzzed across the counter. I almost ignored it. Anyone who truly knew me would not call unannounced anymore. They would text first. Respect, I had learned, shows itself in small habits. The number was unfamiliar. I answered anyway. Clara, woman, said, her voice hesitant, older. This is Margaret Levin. I'm calling about your mother. I leaned against the counter. Margaret Levin. The name surfaced slowly. A longtime friend. Bridge club. Church committees. One of the women my mother trusted to admire her without asking questions. What about her? I asked. There was a pause, a breath taken carefully. She's been admitted, Margaret said. Stress-related collapse. The doctors say it's not life-threatening, but she's not well. I closed my eyes. Not relief, not satisfaction. Just a dull acknowledgement. I thought you should know, Margaret added. She keeps asking for you. Of course she did. I'm sorry she's unwell, I said. And I meant it. But you won't come, Margaret said softly. It wasn't a question. No, I replied. Another pause. I understand, Margaret said finally. I didn't at first, but I do now. After we hung up, I stood there for a long moment, the quiet of my apartment pressing in around me. For years, I had imagined this moment. The call, the crisis, the expectation that I would return, erase everything with forgiveness, take my place again as the accommodating daughter. It felt strange to realize that the fantasy no longer held power. I wasn't angry. I wasn't cold. I was finished. Later that evening, my father called. She keeps asking for you, he said, his voice tired. She says she needs to explain. I understand, I replied. And he asked? And explanations without change are just rehearsals, I said. He sighed. She's scared. I was scared for years, I said quietly. No one came. Silence stretched between us. She doesn't know how to exist without control, he admitted. She doesn't know who she is now. That isn't my responsibility, I said gently. It never was. He didn't argue. I wish I had protected you, he said instead. I wish you had too, I replied. But wishing doesn't rewrite history. When the call ended, I sat on the couch and let the weight of it settle. Not grief, not guilt. Finality. That week, the legal paperwork concluded. Restitution finalized. Accounts corrected. The law, methodical and unemotional, finished what it had started. My grandmother's legacy was restored on paper. But more importantly, something else had been returned. My name. Not Holloway the difficult one. Not Holloway the jealous sister. Not Holloway the afterthought. Just Claire. At work, we wrapped the year with a quiet toast. No speeches, no forced cheer. Just acknowledgement of survival growth and the unglamorous work of integrity. Marianne raised her glass. To clarity, she said. I smiled. To peace. That night, alone again, I took out my grandmother's watch and held it in my palm. It ticked steadily, indifferent to drama, faithful to time. She had once told me, the truth doesn't rush. It waits until people are ready to hear it. I wondered if my mother would ever be ready. I also knew it no longer mattered. Because healing does not require reconciliation. It requires boundaries. The season turned, Christmas lights came down, the city exhaled into January. I felt something new taking shape inside me. Not revenge, not triumph. Agency. For the first time, my future did not feel like a reaction to my past. It felt chosen. There was only one chapter left to write. Not about them, but about who I would become without carrying their weight any longer. The first morning of the new year arrived quietly. No calls, no apologies, no last-minute attempts to rewrite the past. Just light through the windows and the sound of the city waking up without ceremony. I made coffee and stood by the window watching people hurry along the sidewalk below, each of them carrying stories no one else could see. For the first time in my life, I did not feel like I was bracing for something. I wasn't waiting for the next criticism, the next dismissal, the next moment I would be reminded to stay small. That tension was gone. Not replaced with happiness exactly, but with space. And space, I had learned, is where real life begins. I spent the morning doing something my younger self never believed she was allowed to do. I planned without factoring anyone else's comfort into the equation. I booked a short trip. Not to visit family, not to prove anything, just because I wanted to see somewhere new. In the afternoon, I met Eleanor for lunch. She studied me over her tea, her eyes sharp as ever. "You look different," she said. "I feel different," I replied. She nodded slowly. "Your grandmother would be proud." The words landed gently, no ache, no longing, just truth. Later that week, I made a decision that surprised even me. I declined a high-profile speaking invitation that would have put my story on a stage. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't need to perform my healing for public approval. Some stories are meant to close quietly. At work, I began mentoring a younger woman from our finance team. Smart, underestimated, careful in the way women become when they've been taught that visibility comes at a cost. "You don't owe anyone smallness," I told her one evening after a long meeting. "You owe yourself honesty." She nodded, eyes bright. "I wish someone had told me that sooner." "So did I said, "but later still works." I never visited my mother in the hospital. She was released after a few weeks. According to my father, she returned home quieter, smaller, less certain of how to command a room that no longer deferred to her. I felt no satisfaction in that, only distance. My father and I spoke occasionally, carefully. He tried in his own halting way to be present without asking for absolution. Some days it worked, some days it didn't. Progress is uneven, I accepted that. Brooke remained silent. I heard through others that she was rebuilding slowly without the scaffolding of favoritism. I hoped she would find herself. I did not need to witness it. Forgiveness, I had learned, does not require proximity. One evening, months later, I opened the old photo album again. This time I added something new, a picture of myself taken recently. No forced smile, no performance, just presence. I placed it beside a photo of my grandmother. It felt complete. There is a myth that revenge is loud, that justice requires spectacle, that closure must involve confrontation and tears and dramatic speeches. But the truth is quieter. The real turning point wasn't the courtroom, or the promotion, or the house being sold. It was the moment I stopped explaining myself, when I stopped hoping they would understand, when I stopped measuring my worth by whether the people who failed me finally approved. That was the day my life actually began. I still carry my past, I don't pretend otherwise, but it no longer drives. It no longer decides where I sit, or how much space I take, or whether I speak. They once taught me I was replaceable. I proved to myself that I am not. If you're listening to this, and you've ever been the one excluded from the table, overlooked in favor of someone louder, shinier, easier to love, hear this clearly. Your silence was never proof of your weakness. It was proof of your endurance. And endurance, when paired with truth, becomes power. You don't need revenge to reclaim your life. You need boundaries. You need clarity. You need the courage to stop waiting for permission that will never come. If any part of my story reflected your own, I'd like to hear it. Tell me in the comments which moment resonated with you most. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because here your voice is not an afterthought. It matters.